Yes.
All right, guys, thanks for coming out tonight. So we have the poll up there. If you can submit that, I'll look at those results and we'll see before and after to determine who won the debate. Also, this event is recorded. So if you don't want to be in the recording, let me know. I'll make sure you're not. I want to thank our speakers for coming out today, as well as Texas Blockchain, which is co-hosting this event, and the MBA program office for the room and getting to advertise at Community Coffee. So a disclaimer I have to say is the event is being hosted by the Longhorn Bitcoin Club and Texas Blockchain, both registered student organizations. This is not an event sponsored by the University of Texas at Austin. The views expressed are of the student organization, invited guest speakers, and do not represent the views of the university or its officers. All right, so today we have Parker Lewis for the pro-Bitcoin side. Parker is the author of the book Gradually Then Suddenly, and is widely recognized as one of the leading voices in Bitcoin education. He's the head of business development at Zapprite, a Bitcoin payments company. Previously, he led business development at Unchained and was an associate at Heyman Capital Management. Based here in Austin, Parker has played a major role in making this city the Bitcoin capital of the country. Thank you, Parker. And for the crypto side, I'm pleased to welcome Professor Cesare Fracassi. Professor Fracassi is a finance professor here at Macomb School of Business, where he leads the blockchain initiative and fintech research lab. He recently served as chief economist at the Coinbase Institute and was part of the state of Texas work group on blockchain matters. A leading researcher in the space, his work spans crypto, corporate finance, and financial technology, published in top journals and helping shape both policy and practice. Thank you, guys. And Parker Lewis will be starting us off. The format, we'll have an opening argument, and you can see the rest on this sheet right here. Thank you, Parker.
All right. Here we go. So I got 10 minutes.
10 minutes.
You're gonna give me a 1 minute warning?
1 minute warning.
All right. All right. So which is the most innovative, Bitcoin or crypto? That's the question. Innovations solve problems. So first, we have to accept what the problem is and that the problem is actually a problem. To be the most innovative, by the framework that I'll use in this, is you have to solve the biggest problem, and then you have to accept what the solution is to the biggest problem. So in this context, I would put forward that the problem is the money. Our money is broken, and it is broken because it can be easily printed. And money, as has been proven time and time again throughout the course of human history, money fails when you print it. Fixing the money is the biggest problem. So to be the most innovative, you need to solve the biggest problem. Money is one side of every value transfer in the world. The market for money, in its most conservative estimate, is $100 trillion. To think about the 100 trillion problem, all of the Magnificent Seven, Google, Facebook, Microsoft, Amazon, Tesla, NVIDIA added together have a market cap of 16 trillion. All of the NASDAQ stock market has a market cap of 30 trillion. Bitcoin intends to solve the problem of money. In my view of that, that is Bitcoin replacing everything that is used today as money. That is Bitcoin replacing a market, a problem that is $100 trillion. So that is my framing of the problem. First, we have to accept that the problem is actually a problem. Not everybody does. Traditional economists, academic economists, I got an economics degree from Duke. Many economists will say printing of money is not a problem. I would put forward to this group that if I could give you two forms of the dollar, one is a dollar that can be easily printed, which is the current version of the dollar. Or I could say you guys could all be paid in a different version of the dollar that can't be printed at all, that has a finite supply. Assuming you are all rational economic actors, 100 out of 100 of you, or 100% of you, would accept the form of the dollar that couldn't be printed. Now, when I first came to the conclusion that Bitcoin was the solution to money, the biggest problem, the most innovative solution to the biggest problem, it was because I came to the conclusion that the Federal Reserve and central banks all over the world were going to have to print money ad infinitum until that failed. Going back to 2007, prior to the great financial crisis, to today, the Federal Reserve has increased the money supply by 7 times, from 1 trillion to 7 trillion, and they will always have to do that until the money fails. This is not an experiment that hasn't been tried before. There are 50 examples of fiat currencies. When you print something at zero cost, it eventually fails. It costs the Fed $0 to print $1. It costs the Fed $0 to print $1 trillion, and it costs the Fed $0 to print $7 trillion. That is at the root of this problem. What happens when the Fed prints money is that the money doesn't get distributed ratably, and it distorts the entire economic fabric. It distorts the foundation of the economic system. That is why ultimately when you print money at no cost, people can't trade their finite time for things that are limited, and eventually they seek out better tools to trade, and in this case, they're seeking out Bitcoin. Now, I need to present my vision of Bitcoin. Oftentimes, if you are new to Bitcoin, you see Bitcoin trading on CNBC, your computer screen, your TV screen, you think of it as any other speculative financial asset. The vision that I put forward for Bitcoin is that the entire world is in the process of adopting Bitcoin as money. It will transition from a nascent and volatile store of value to a very stable, fully functioning currency system. Everything will be priced in Bitcoin. Everything will be paid in Bitcoin. And that is in direct commerce. That means food at the grocery store, gas at the gas station being priced in Bitcoin and traded in Bitcoin. Now, why? What is the innovation in Bitcoin? The entire world is adopting Bitcoin as money because of its fixed supply. Its fixed supply of 21 million is the innovation. It is non-trivial. Now, I'm going to read a quote from Eric Schmidt. It'll be the one thing that I read. This is from Eric Schmidt, former CEO of Google. Bitcoin is a remarkable cryptographic achievement, and the ability to create something which is not duplicable in the digital world has enormous value. If you skip past the how this currency that is digital can have a finite supply where I can send it to any of you, but I can't send the same currency unit to anybody else, everybody in the world can opt into that system. Everyone can opt into a form of money that can't be printed. All of the money gets to the right place. No one can spend money that isn't theirs. And all of that happens without central coordination. If you skip right past that and don't appreciate how foundational and fundamental it is, you will miss the innovation. Now, what is built on top of that innovation? A currency system is being built on top of it. Now, the way to think about this is Bitcoin's fixed supply being the true innovation, but what's being built on top of that? Ways to store it, custody solutions. Bitcoin scarcity cannot be of value to you if it were possible to lose. We have to build the tools so that you can go to the gas station and accept it as money, or to the grocery store and accept it as money, or to the doctor and accept it as money. All of that is being built. Now, importantly, though, if you accept that money is the biggest problem, and if you accept that the solution to that would necessarily have to be the most innovative, the question remains, why not crypto, right? Why Bitcoin and why not crypto? And I'll explain 3 different variants of crypto. One is crypto that's competing as money, and what I would put forward to you is functionally that is everything. The second version of crypto is non-money blockchain. The third version of crypto is US stablecoins or fiat stablecoins. For the first one, why not non-money cryptos? Well, let's just talk about what's happened in the market. Bitcoin has been around for 16 years. There are no fewer than 50,000 times that people have copied Bitcoin. Some have copied it identically. Some have said, I'm going to copy this part of it, but I'm putting to the market that this piece of it's improved. Of the 50,000, realistically, it's more than that, but let's just take 50,000. If you add up the value of all 50,000, they represent 1/3 of all the value in crypto. And this one thing, Bitcoin, represents 2/3. And again, the question is why, and is that by coincidence? What I put forward as to why Bitcoin is the most innovative, why it's the solution to money, has actually very little to do with Bitcoin. It is because there's a fundamental economic fact, an unavoidable economic fact. It's not something I want, it's not something Professor Fracassi might want, it's not something that you might want, is that money converges to one common medium based on the nature of the problem that it solves, which is trade. We have to form a consensus as to what money is in order to trade. I have to have the form of money you're willing to accept, and you must accept the form of money that I have. We don't arrive at that conclusion randomly, and the most important property of money is simply that it can't be printed. Again, go back to that example. If I gave you a version of the dollar that could be easily printed versus one that was finite and couldn't be printed, 100 out of 100 of you would choose the form of money that can't be printed. That is a rational economic response. Now, some people envision this world of crypto where they say, oh, the machines are going to do all the calculations and we're going to have hundreds of cryptocurrencies. No. It doesn't solve the problem. Interestingly enough, in this world of AI, this just came out yesterday, this group of researchers put 1,000 AI agents into a game of Minecraft to see what would happen. They observed a lot of things, but one of the things that they observed was that with no prompting, organically, those 1,000 AI agents converge on one form of money in the game of Minecraft, where there was no money. They used gems. The market converges on one form of money for very fundamental reasons, being that it solves the problem of trade, and the most important property is scarcity, and that it can't be printed. That is the problem that Bitcoin solved. If you go back to that quote from Eric Schmidt, that it is not trivial, it doesn't happen by coincidence, a lot is underneath the hood, and that if you look at the market has looked at all different variants of crypto being created, and if you add them all together, Bitcoin's value is more than 2 times everything else. All non-Bitcoin or non-money blockchain tech, IBM's tried it, JP Morgan's tried it, virtually every Fortune 100 has tried it. There is nothing of value, no system working today. That is evidence. And then on the fiat side, fiat stablecoins do not solve the problem of printing money, which Bitcoin solves.
So first of all, I kind of agree with most of what Mark is saying. You know, I'm not against Bitcoin. I'm actually not even pro-crypto too much. When I talk to people that are pro-crypto, they tell me that I'm a crypto skeptic. When I talk to the people that are crypto skeptic, they tell me I'm a pro-crypto. So I guess I'm kind of like a crypto realist. And so I look at the problem and try to find a solution. So, you know, I'm going to start with the same example. I think the biggest disagreement is what is the problem we're trying to solve here? And so Parker says that Bitcoin is here to solve the problem of money. I'm not a macroeconomist, right? So I'm a finance professor, and I look at our current financial system. And the biggest issue that I view about the current financial system is that that is not interconnected very well. So you have your bank account, you have your insurance company, your brokerage account, you move money with payments, and every bank is siloed. And then if you start moving outside of the US and trying to move money abroad, it's even harder. So in a way, you have all these financial assets, they don't talk to each other, and they're not natively digital. However, we live in a world that is digital and more like in the AI economy. So, you know, I don't know if you saw with the Coinbase, we need to upgrade the system. What does it mean to upgrade the system? It means we want to have a platform that is common to everybody. So think about your phone. So you have your phone, or your operating system, your phone. So you would like to have an operating system where your bank, your insurance company, your brokerage write applications, software that people can use that is completely interoperable and seamless. Now, ideally, this is what we would like to have. We would like to have a financial operating system where your bank is just an app on this system. So that if you want to move money, if you want to move stocks, any type of financial asset, it flows seamlessly because everybody is interconnected. That's the main idea of crypto. Now, the big question is who owns this financial infrastructure, these operating systems? The government? Do we want the government to actually own this critical piece of infrastructure? Well, that's actually what China is trying to do. You know, China is trying to build a blockchain, but it's not really a blockchain. It's basically a centralized server that controls all the economy, all the economic activities in China. Obviously, we don't want that. You know, huge risk of basically having one single state entity controlling every single economic activity in the country. So we don't want that. The alternative, do we want big tech, you know, Apple or Google running this financial operating system? Probably not. You know, Apple and Google right now charge 30% of every revenue that actually you use in the app. We don't want this monopolistic behavior. So what's the alternative? Maybe we want to have what's called a decentralized operating system. So let me introduce this idea of Ethereum. Okay, so Ethereum is, if you talk to Vitalik, he says, it's a decentralized world computer. Essentially, what it gives you a platform that is decentralized. You know, in the same as Bitcoin, they don't use proof of work, they use proof of stake, but the idea is very simple. You have a decentralized platform that is not controlled by anyone, is not owned by anybody, but it allows you to write applications and execute code that anybody in the world can use. So whether you live in Italy, in India, in the US, you can interact with each other without asking permission for anyone. So you don't. So if I want to borrow from an Italian person, I engage in a smart contract on Ethereum, and there is no intermediary there. So this is, in a way, the dream that I would like to get. I would like to get to a place where everybody in the world can interact with each other, not just exchanging money, because yes, money is important, but there are many other financial assets here. There are stocks, there are bonds, there are insurance contracts. There are so many things in finance that we do, and we would like to have an operating system that allows us to actually access and interact with each other. But this operating system has to be decentralized. And that's why I see many of the crypto infrastructure, these are called layer ones, many of this crypto infrastructure are providing this operating system. Now, there are many of them. You know, so if you talk, there is Ethereum, there is Solana, there is Avalanche. Everybody's trying to create an infrastructure that is faster, cheaper, and the most decentralized as possible. And so I don't know if you're familiar with what's called the blockchain trilemma, where essentially they say it's very hard until now to find something that is fully decentralized, that is fully scalable, and also fully secure. And so people have been adopted. So the reason why Ethereum, Solana, they've been changing so much is because we're trying to create the best possible experience of a global computer. So if you think about the world of AI, so let me give you an example. So I would love to have an AI agent that checks my homeowner insurance and my car insurance, that shops around, find the best rate, and then as soon as they find the best rate, switch me completely, closing my account, opening a new account, and with this new car insurance company. And every day continuously shop for me to find the best rate on the insurance, or the best rate for CDs, or the best rate for my deposit, my bank deposit. So we would like to live in a world where AI agents natively interact with smart contract on Ethereum in order to actually find the best rate for me. So they will lead to a better, more open, inclusive, and competitive financial system. So are we there with with Ethereum, no. Are we there with Solana? Again, it's a different location in this triangle. You know, Solana is a little more centralized, but it's definitely faster and cheaper. So we're trying to find a way to make this work, where we have a decentralized and secure platform for any application that can be deployed on the network anywhere in the world. Now, this is the ideal. What are the practical problems? One problem is AML. You know, like we know that there are some bad actors out there, and we would like to shield the bad actors away from this permissionless operating system. So again, it's a trade-off there. We want the system to be open to all the good actors, but not open to the bad actors. How do we do that? It's a work in progress. Another issue is scalability and access. You know, these operating systems, these user interfaces are still not there. So I teach finance and crypto to the students, and one of the assignment is that they go ahead and use these crypto wallets, and sometimes it's still a very frustrating experience. The last piece that is missing is regulation. Right now, up until a couple of months ago, the regulatory bodies were very, very against open innovation in crypto. Now things are changing, and hopefully we're going to move a little faster. But at the same time, if you actually see what actually is being used crypto for right now, you know, most of it is like meme coins, speculation, things that actually don't change our lives. And so we want to get to a point where what we can do in crypto is truly meaningful. And in order to do that, the environment to be safe, open, and permissionless. Thank you.
All right. So let's get to the heart of this, that we don't agree on the problem. So what you guys have to think about is, what is the bigger problem? Is the bigger problem being able to send your friend money on Venmo or buying stocks in your trading account, or is the problem the money? And the way that I would think about this is that the money is at the foundation of all finance. Everything that Professor Fracassi said of everything was an interaction with money. He talked about wanting an interconnected, platform that is common to everyone. What we really need is a form of money that is common to everyone and that can't be printed by anyone. And to think about this problem of money being a problem, right now in America, fewer than 50% of people have enough money in their bank account to cover an emergency $400 purchase. That is a problem. That problem is created because as central banks, Fracassi also said, doesn't want the government to own that operating system. Well, right now, the central bank, the governments own the money system, and the operating system of the financial system sits on top of the money. So you can't have an operating system not owned by the government if the most important part of it, the foundation, is controlled by it, the money. So let's think about this problem. 50% of people in the United States do not have savings. I just got my car battery fixed. That was $400. So what it means is the majority of Americans cannot afford to change the battery in their car if it's broken. That's a problem. That is created by inflation. Let's think about this problem. The Fed has increased the money supply by 7 times from 2006 to today. Median wages have gone up by about 70%. Median house prices have gone up by 180%. The average dozen of eggs in America went from $1.22 to $6. The average pound of beef went from $2 to $5. The cost of living is unsustainable. How is that realized? That's realized because 50% of Americans don't have savings. Their wages aren't keeping up. That happens as a function of printing money. So the printing of money is a problem. It's the biggest problem. If we escape out of our bubble and accept that most of Americans are struggling, There are three currencies that have hyperinflated in the last 5 years: the Turkish lira, the Argentine peso, and the Venezuelan bolivar. Bitcoin is not just solving a problem for America. It's fixed supply. It's money that can't be printed. Is just not for Americans. 5 billion out of 8 billion people in the world, and I would exclude the 3 billion that have access to the US dollar, the euro, the Japanese yen, or the Chinese yuan, don't even have access to what I would consider as bad money. So Bitcoin is solving a problem for all 8 billion people. You can go deliver value to somebody in the world and save money in something that somebody else can't print, versus the alternative, which is something that currently is metastasizing and causing havoc and economic instability. Now, Professor Fracassi brought up this concept of this operating system of Ethereum and Solana. Well, the recognition is each one of those are the 2 and 3 largest cryptocurrencies. They're all competing as money. And if you accept this idea that for very fundamental reasons, money converges to one, and that the most important property is that it can't be printed, that Bitcoin's innovation is its fixed supply. No one could tell you what the supply of Ethereum is. No one could tell you what the supply of Solana is. And what I would tell you as a practitioner of somebody who's developed on Ethereum, previously on the custody side, Ethereum is the second largest cryptocurrency. It's competing as money. It is completely centralized. Recently, the guy who created Ethereum, Vitalik Buterin, and I'm going to read you a quote for him. When people were challenging how they were going to change Ethereum, this is what Vitalik Buterin said. Said, no, this is not how this game works. The person deciding the new Ethereum Foundation leadership team is me. One of the goals of the ongoing reform is to give the Ethereum Foundation a proper board, but until that happens, it's me. If you keep the quote pressure on, then you are creating an environment that is actively toxic to top talent, and you are decreasing the chance that I have any interest whatsoever in doing what you want. How is it realized in practice? Ethereum, the code gets changed and it doesn't disrupt the network at all. Everyone knows that this is a massively centralized system. Ethereum is the second largest crypto, and as this verbatim quote establishes that Vitalik Buterin is control, all you're trading is the Federal Reserve for a cryptocurrency controlled by somebody else. Money is the problem. The problem is that it can be easily printed. The innovation in Bitcoin, the solution to the largest problem by definition must be the most innovative, is solving a problem for all 8 billion people in the world, because even the last person to adopt Bitcoin will be able to opt into a system that is fair, that is egalitarian, that will store value for them. And what really matters is how we spend our day-to-day lives, our ability to have a life worth living, to not struggle how we're going to pay rent or get food at the grocery store. And you have to accept that the majority of people in the world are suffering that problem. And each of us, it's not just the people at the lowest end of the spectrum, it's that the printing of money ultimately causes the currencies to fail. This has happened 50 to 60 times in history. And it simply happens because if it costs 0 to print any money, it costs 0 for the Fed to create 7 trillion. So I would just anchor to that idea that the money is the real problem. The money is the foundation of everything that Professor Fracassi described as wanting. Having a money system that is outside the control of the government is a necessity to having an operating system that sits on top of it that's not controlled by the government, because they control access to that financial system. And every other form of cryptocurrency is ultimately fully centralized. It is faux decentralization. Bitcoin is decentralized. It only works because it's outside of the control of any country. No CEO, no foundation, no Vitalik Buterin, no Ethereum Foundation, no Solana Foundation, or the people that control the Solana Foundation and so with that, I will turn it back over.
I kind of agree with Parker. If you Google my name, I actually wrote a paper that actually looks at how decentralized Ethereum is. the governance of Ethereum. So I wrote a paper that actually was very quite critical of the Ethereum Foundation. I said the Ethereum Foundation has too much power in deciding how the protocol is going to evolve. And so we collect a lot of data to show how centralized or decentralized the Ethereum is. The answer is it's not like Bitcoin. It's not as decentralized as Bitcoin. The problem with Bitcoin is that Bitcoin doesn't solve the problem that I'm trying to solve. Okay? Bitcoin, in my view, Satoshi Nakamoto should win the Nobel Prize in economics because the innovation that Bitcoin brought is amazing. You know, just the idea of having a decentralized financial system, it's really revolutionary. The problem with Bitcoin is that it's kind of like your grandmother, you know, like it's great, but it's kind of old, it moves slow, it doesn't change very much, and a little stubborn, okay? Bitcoin doesn't help to create this operating system on which I can deploy smart contracts that can interconnect everybody. Right? And so we need to evolve. The reason why Bitcoin has 65% of all the market cap in crypto is because it doesn't change. And not changing is a quality in itself. The reason why gold is still used in many countries is because gold has a history of not changing. You know, so the reason why Bitcoin has so much value, because Bitcoin is a store of value. And so part of the store of value is that it cannot change by definition. Is it okay to have, you know, time between block of 10 minutes? And so you have to wait 6 confirmation, you have to wait, you know, an hour before you actually assure you actually receive Bitcoin, where you have 1 megabyte in block. Probably not. It's not very well optimized, Bitcoin. But because there is this idea that the first one, then there is this social consensus, this coordination, these external network externalities, where everybody agrees that the original money is the first one. So Bitcoin doesn't solve my problem. It might solve his problem, you know, but we need to evolve. And evolving takes time and effort and mistakes. So I agree with you. Solana is not too decentralized. Actually, Solana is even less decentralized than Ethereum. At least Ethereum is trying, right? But we want to get there. We want to get there to a solution, and we're not there yet, where we do have this decentralized. And so you actually look at the road plan for Ethereum, and it tells you that at some point we're going to stop innovating, and we're going to let the platform do what it's supposed to do. And it takes time, it takes work to get there. So
You say the phrase next time.
All right. So first, most important feature of Bitcoin, it's credibly enforced the supply, the foundation of the world's money system. A form of money that can't be printed is the most important property of money. And because Bitcoin is global and permissionless, literally everyone in the world can opt into it. So if you accept that the money is the biggest problem to solve, the question is, what is the solution to that, and is Bitcoin it? And if you think about your own lives, if you could opt into a form of money that can't be printed versus one that easily is, you would opt into the form of money that can't be printed. As Fracassi said, Bitcoin's slow, it doesn't change much. He then came back and said, the fact that Bitcoin can't change is actually a feature. It's the most important feature, in fact. It is that if you opt into Bitcoin, if you save in Bitcoin, its fixed supply cannot change. There's no CEO control of it. That because if one feature could change, then its fixed supply would be at risk. The most important feature not to change is its fixed supply. Now, other things in Bitcoin can change, but it's incredibly difficult to change, and that is to all of our benefits. If you had to opt into a centralized currency, which is functionally all of other crypto, you are opting into a system of trust. Now, Bitcoin, think about it as this rock solid foundation. It's fixed supply that is immutable. And then think about the fact that I could send two of you money, the identical Bitcoin at the identical time, and each of you could try to deliver me a good or service. The network would determine which one of those Bitcoin transactions is valid and which is not. And then contemplate the fact that literally everyone in the world will be able to send money to each other without needing trust and without a central third party being able to intermediate or invalidate that transaction. Because if Bitcoin is the foundation and there are these quote slow blocks, there are also ways that are being innovated where I could pay you Bitcoin instantly on the Lightning Network and have it instantly settle where I could send it to you, no takebacks, and everyone in the world could opt into that system. So it is, if you build on top of things that are unstable or centralized or that are dependent on trust, like all other crypto, you are opting into a system of trust. And if you have to trust one thing, you ultimately have to trust that your currency can't debase, which is unsolving the problem. And so what I would put forward is that everything that Professor Fracassi wants will be built on Bitcoin. It won't necessarily be built on the final settlement layer, but it will be built on top of it because everything is transacted for money. If you build on top of a weak foundation, everything on top of it is going to be fragile. If you build on top of a rock solid foundation, fixed supply of 21 million, no one can alter it. Humans innovate on top of that scarcity. Scarcity in the currency leads to abundance in real life and in real economic activity. And everything that could possibly, that you could imagine doing as a business, a good or service, what's most important to you is being paid for that in something that somebody in a far off land can't print, because that printing of money is the root cause of economic instability, unsustainable wealth gaps, and ultimately the fragility that we see in practice, the financial crisis in 2008 and 9, 2020 to 2022, what we're currently seeing in the markets. All of that will persist until we fix the money. Money is the biggest problem, and Bitcoin is the solution to the biggest problem. So therefore, it is the real innovation and the biggest innovation of all of our lifetimes, even bigger than the internet. And with that, I'll turn it back over.
Well, which one is the biggest problem at the end? Because it seems to me that we're trying to address two different problems. And the question is fixing the financial system a more important problem than having a fixed supply of money? And I think the answer is it depends where you live. So Parker said Turkey, Argentina, hyperinflation. This is problematic. Okay, so if I lived in Argentina and Turkey, I would either buy Bitcoin or I will buy US dollar, which is actually what most people do. So let's why are they buying US dollars? For the most part, because the inflation is very low. So right now inflation is about 3.5%. It was higher. It peaked at 8-9% during right after COVID. But on average, if you actually look back over the last 15, 20 years, it's been about 2.5%. So now you might ask yourself, why do they have a 2.5% target? Why don't you just put 0% target? If you actually talk to the Fed doesn't have a target of 0. They could say constant monetary supply. Our target is 0. We don't want to print more money. They could say that, but they don't do that. If you talk to Jerome Powell, the chairman of the Fed, they said our target is 2%. Do you know why? You know why they don't put it at 0? Because the cost of inflation is less than the cost of deflation. And so they will never be able to actually put it exactly at zero, you know? And so it's a little better to actually have a little buffer on being a little inflationary than a little deflationary, right? Also, the economy grows. And so you want to keep up with, you know, you're going to print money to keep up with the growth of the economy. Otherwise, it's going to be disinflation. Even though, like, I'm not a macroeconomist, so I feel a little not easy about talking too much about all this stuff. But my understanding is actually having a low 2% inflation is good, better than zero. Now, this is if you trust your government. The reason why Argentinians use US dollars is because they trust the US dollar. Yeah. So also during the financial crisis or during COVID, you know, all the businesses shut down. And so what the Fed did, they printed money. They probably printed too much money. But that was probably necessary to actually allow the business to survive. To be honest with you, I don't know what would have happened during COVID if we all use Bitcoin. Because again, the economy shuts down. You cannot print any more Bitcoin. What are you going to do? Who is going to give the Bitcoin to the small business to survive for the next 3 or 4 months? So in times of crisis, actually, if you go back to the Great Depression, 1930s, one of the reasons why we had the Great Depression is because the Fed didn't print enough money. And so, yes, I think the Fed overshot it, but it was essential that the Fed could print money to give to all businesses. Now, there were a lot of scams and fraud and so on, to agree with you. But if we had constant monetary supply, it would have been a disaster. So it's always a trade-off between, in my view, if you don't trust the government at all, like Argentina and Turkey, probably you wanna get rid of the power to print the press, to print money. If you kind of trust your government that it's more or less doing the right thing, sometimes they make a little mistake, then clearly having a Fed that actually prints money when needed is very, very important. In fact, when people were using gold, they still had huge crises. Even gold is a fixed supply. They had huge crises because, you know, like the plague happened in 1400. What would have been the right response? To print more money, to print more gold, to support the economy. But they couldn't because they had gold. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor. Now on to the closing arguments. Each Park Grant professor will get 5 minutes each to close it out before Q&A.
Well, that was a misread. So let's come back to the printing of money. That's the root of this. My good friend Michael Goldstein sitting in the back, and he says a lot of intelligent things, but one of them is, you can print money, you're going to print money. People can print money, they're going to print money. The Federal Reserve prints a ton of money. $1 trillion was the money supply in 2006. There's now $7 trillion floating around. The reason why people don't have savings is because their savings are designed to lose value. So when you think about the problem of, well, what happens in times of crisis? Who's going to print the money? The reason why there's a crisis is because they printed money. Think about those 50% of people on the lower end of the economic spectrum in the United States that don't have $400 to spend in emergency. They get money as food gets more expensive. The cost of eggs, like inflation is cumulative. Think about the cost of eggs going from $1.22 a dozen to $6.50 a dozen over the course of 20 years. Inflation is cumulative. The reason why people don't have savings is because they print money, and then they defend the printing of money because people don't have savings to be able to spend a rainy day fund. The other thing I would say is, if any country wanted to have a central bank on a Bitcoin standard, we could capitalize the Fed with actual Bitcoin and actual money, and then they could decide who to lend it out to give it to. All we're talking about is taking away the ability to create money out of thin air. And then if you accept that 5 out of 8 billion people in the world don't even have access to what I would consider bad money, that the problem is the money globally. Bitcoin is solving the problem for everyone in the world. If you create an incentive to save, the fact that people's money cannot be debased, then people will save. Then we will have greater economic stability and economic balance, because when there are economic disruptions, if people had more than the equivalent of $400 in their bank account, they wouldn't need the government to bail them out. So at the root cause is the printing of money as the problem. Central banks do it all over the world. They will have to continue to do it because of the imbalance between the amount of debt in the system and the amount of dollars that exists. That's why they printed $3.5 trillion between 2009 and 2014. It's why they had to print $5 trillion between 2020 and 2022. It's why they will have to print trillions of dollars more. That is a problem for everyone on earth. And if you don't think about the macro, but think about yourself, and then you add up yourself to the person next to you, and to the person next to you, and to the person next to you, that every individual economic actor, if posed with that simple question, would you rather be paid in the form of money that can't be printed or one that is regularly and gets devalued, you would choose the money that can't be printed, and so would the person next to you, and so would the person next to them. So money is the problem. It is the largest market. Bitcoin's fixed supply is the solution to that largest problem. Everyone in this room suffers from that problem. Everyone in the world suffers from the problem. We can't fix any higher level problem like the financial system and getting loans, or how we interact with different platforms on the internet to send money people, if we don't fix the money first. So therefore, Bitcoin is the innovation. It's the most important innovation because it solves the largest problem for the most people.
Well, I don't want to talk about Bitcoin too much. Again, I think my proposition is that we need to fix the financial system. And I think that using crypto can help us to fix it. I think this is uncontroversial that our financial system can be improved dramatically. It's uncontroversial that we need more coordination and we need more digital access to AI agents. This is just is not up for debate, I think. I don't think anyone disagrees with that. Now for Bitcoin, if you talk to macroeconomists or the people at the Fed and so on, is it true that having a constant supply of money is the right thing to do? Because that's what Parker advocates, that we should always have a fixed amount supply of money. And that's up for debate. I think 99% of the economists, if you poll them, if you believe experts and so on, if you poll them, professors, researchers, and if you say, do you think it's a good idea to have a fixed amount of money? Probably 99% of them will say no. They understand that sometimes you need to print money. You need to have the ability to print money. Obviously with the risk that sometimes the government gets too money happy and they just print too much money. And that's the risk. But the problem is if you constrain yourself not to print any money at all, you might actually have costs that outweighs the benefit. So on one hand, the risk of hyperinflation. And the other hand is the risk of complete paralysis of the economic system when you need the money, but you don't have it. Anyway, but this is Bitcoin. So the question, my final point is, it's uncontroversial that we need to fix and improve our financial system. It's very controversial whether we need a limited supply of money.
Thank you, guys. We're gonna take about a couple minutes. Please submit the final poll if your view shifted, choosing crypto or Bitcoin. I'll open that up right now, and then we'll do some Q&A. Should be live now.
We're doing before Q&A?
Sorry?
Voting before Q&A?
Yeah. Yes. So you're in the frame. Q&A. Yeah.
Says
Just
closed.
closed.
What position do you hold on the post
Closed.
debate? You should wait until after the Q&A anyway.
After the Q&A?
Yeah, so that
Okay.
they have a chance to
Yeah. We'll
read
do
over the last.
I just closed it back up, so we'll have some time at the end to vote. But just the beginning position is overwhelmingly Bitcoin. But now, so you guys can also submit the questions here, and if you like a question, just upvote it. I'll go from top to bottom. So we'll start out. First question: if Bitcoin and cryptocurrency in general are supposed to be the new money, why are they correlated to the stock market, unlike gold?
So what I would answer that is Bitcoin is not correlated, actually. It might seem to be correlated day to day, but if you zoom out and look at it over long enough time horizons, that what I would say is Bitcoin was not correlated when it went from 1,000 to 19,000. It was not correlated when it went back down to 3,000. It was not correlated when it went up to 69,000 and then back down to 16,000 and then back up to 91,000. So if you pay attention to it on a day where Bitcoin is not particularly volatile, it might appear to be correlated to the stock market. But to give you a sense, when Bitcoin in 2020, it went from 8,000 to 4,000 a single day, and now it is 90,000. The stock market went down about 30%, and it's about 70% higher. So Bitcoin is adopted as knowledge distributes, as we sit in rooms like this and discuss what is its basis of value, why is its fixed supply important, and that process of learning takes time. People have to read books, listen to podcasts, hear debates like this. As people understand Bitcoin, they opt in, and that's why it's both volatile because people are opting into it for the first time, but as more people figure it out, its price goes up. So I would reject the idea that it's correlated. It's correlated maybe today or tomorrow, but on a long enough time horizon, it's very obviously not correlated.
If you look at the data, correlation between Bitcoin and the S&P 500 until 2020, so if you go from 2014 to 2012, correlation is zero. And then 2020, there was a regime shift. If you look at the last 5 years, the correlation between Bitcoin and all the crypto and the stock market is about 40% on average. You know, some days it's zero, some days it's 100, but correlation is 40%. When COVID hit, all the tech stocks went down, all the market went down, and Bitcoin went down. When the tariffs were announced, stock market dropped, Bitcoin and all the crypto dropped. It's uncontroversial that over the last 5 years, crypto trades like a tech stock. But you know why? Because it is a tech stock. It's a bet about using technology to fix our financial system. And like any other technology, it should trade like a tech stock. So I have no problem in the fact that crypto trades like a stock, a tech stock, because it is.
Next question. It's a quantum question. Let's say quantum computing advances faster and farther than many people expect. What can be done to upgrade Bitcoin to make it more quantum resistant?
Yeah, so Bitcoin is ultimately secured by cryptography, and different address schemes have different security associated with them. Certain addresses right now in Bitcoin are far more secure than the early addresses that were used, and that as our understanding of cryptography evolves, that Bitcoin has I'd say it has the greatest incentive to adapt. And just as Bitcoin has changed signature schemes multiple times already, there are already ways identified that are quantum resistant. And many of the addresses, as an example, the Bitcoin multi-sig addresses are far more quantum resistant today. Early addresses for Bitcoin aren't. So it's one of those things that, basically, if you had a computer that could hack your bank account address, that would be a problem. In Bitcoin, it's a known problem. It's something that's being worked on. But I'd say that Bitcoin is the most secure system, because rather than having passwords that have 10 characters to 20 characters, each Bitcoin address at minimum is a 250-bit string of numbers to be de-encrypted. But more importantly, it's that Bitcoin's already advanced from weaker signature schemes to more secure signature schemes. And we already know or have various different ideas and proposals as to what even more quantum resistant signature schemes would exist. And so it's an evolving system. That's one of the examples how Bitcoin can change and adapt. And that in order to adopt Bitcoin as money or view its fixed supply to be credible, you would also have to reason through those challenges of advancements in cryptography. And so as the market observes that behavior, people continue to opt into Bitcoin despite those known threat vectors.
Yeah, no, so I don't think it's a quantum is a problem. I think it's a problem for all the lost Bitcoins. So most likely Bitcoin is going to upgrade to a better quantum resistant cryptography. Now the question is, there is an estimate about 20% of the Bitcoin currently in circulation. Now we have 19 million Bitcoin. About 20% of them is believed to be lost, either lost or just people die and it's lost. Right? So think about Satoshi Nakamoto. I think he currently owns about $3 to $4 billion in Bitcoin. And if he's dead and those Bitcoins aren't retrievable, there's going to be a gold rush of all the people who go with quantum computing trying to go and steal his money. So the interesting aspect is not, Bitcoin is gonna survive, but there's gonna be a quantum rush to hack all the lost Bitcoins. The guy who lost the laptop in the garden, in the trash and so on. There's gonna be a rush to actually steal all that money.
I think this is for Professor Fracassi. If you had to pick one non-Bitcoin protocol to bet on for global impact in the next 10 years, what would it be and why?
I like Ethereum because even though it's not as decentralized as I would like to be, it's the closest in spirit to where we're going to be. So I will pick Ethereum not as an investment. Again, I really don't care too much about how Ethereum trades, and Solana trades and so on, or even Bitcoin trades. I care about solving real world problems. And so Ethereum seems to me in the best position possible to solve and address this problem. Now, price-wise, it's not doing very well, but there are many different reasons for it.
Next question, with institutional and government funding entering Bitcoin with greater purchasing power than retail, how will this affect Bitcoin? Does it make Bitcoin quasi-centralized?
So my answer to that would be that oftentimes Bitcoin is described as a currency for enemies, that for Bitcoin to work, for it to have a incredibly fixed supply, to be the foundation of all the world's money, that people that hate each other have to be able to opt in and also trust that system. And so as the US government forms a strategic Bitcoin reserve, whereas the state of Texas, there are 20 states that are currently working specifically on strategic Bitcoin reserves. As it's rumored that Russia is mining Bitcoin, Abu Dhabi is mining Bitcoin, El Salvador has made Bitcoin legal tender. Every country in the world is going to adopt Bitcoin. These are all competing interests that the larger that Bitcoin gets, it doesn't matter if there's large holders. If you think about at inception, when Bitcoin was created, there was one guy. When Hal Finney joined the network, 7 days later, there were two. That as more people participate in the network, regardless of large interests, it's like more large interests come, they're all competing interests, but everyone has alignment in preventing everybody else from printing money and ensuring that no one has that power. And so realistically, at a system level, as Bitcoin gets larger, it becomes more decentralized, regardless of large actors, because each large actor represents a smaller share over time, and people can only spend Bitcoin once. So ultimately, I don't see it as a problem. I don't see governments funding it. You have to evaluate Bitcoin and the credibility of its fixed supply. Say, can anybody undermine it? Assume your worst enemy created it. Could your worst enemy undermine the way that Bitcoin works, the way that it enforces its fixed supply? That really is the innovation, and as it gets larger, it gets harder to stop. Just thinking about, it's like the largest game of whack-a-mole that's ever existed, and that we actually want really large interests adopting Bitcoin and creating incentives to secure it, to mine it, and to use power to secure it, which all of those incentives go together. So
I've been publicly very against Bitcoin strategic reserve, not because it's Bitcoin. I'm against an Ethereum strategic reserve either. The reason is I don't think that the government should be in the business of taxing your money and buying any asset that they don't need to provide services. So as a principle, I think the government should tax the money to provide, basic services, and that's it. I don't want them to invest in Tesla. I don't want them to invest in AI. I don't want them to invest in Bitcoin. Let the private sector do that. If I want to buy Bitcoin, I can use my money. I don't need the government to tax me and then buy Bitcoin for me.
You have a follow-up on that, Matt?
On that point, you're referring to large actors in the Bitcoin network. I'm assuming you're referring to the hash power and not a one wallet having 20% of the world's Bitcoin.
I would say both are relevant, because, and I would also say that when I talk about, governments owning Bitcoin, I view everyone's going to be operating on a Bitcoin standard, that it is money. That's the difference. It's not investing, in my view, it's not investing in tech stocks. It's the future of money, and that we're all going to be using Bitcoin at a grocery store, and that we're going to be paying taxes in Bitcoin. We're going to be paying taxes in money that works. But to answer your specific question, that if there was a large holder of Bitcoin, and like an example would be, it doesn't even need to be the large holder. It could be all the ETFs are custody of Coinbase. And so Coinbase is actually in control of all of BlackRock's Bitcoin. And there's all of BlackRock's Bitcoin, all of the ETFs except for Fidelity. And so what really matters is how much that entity controls. And yes, there's laws. And if they tried to, do something that BlackRock didn't want, they'd be in violation of a contract law and would be taken to court. But the reason why that large holdership is also important is that if somebody changed a rule to Bitcoin, like as an example, there was in 2017, 90% of the miners and the large institutions got together to try to force a change onto the network. And that there was a split in the network, and basically everyone that had Bitcoin on that day had the equivalent number of coins on either side, and the market decided what was actually Bitcoin. They sold one and bought the other, such that if you had control of an overwhelming share of the economic value, you could influence the decisions of the network or the rules of the network potentially. Now, the way I look at it is that, Coinbase is custodying all this Bitcoin for the ETS, the U.S. Marshal Service, and they have less Bitcoin in custody today than they did in 2014. That as a share, they were larger of the network. And so as you have Fidelity's popping up and custodying Bitcoin, and banks in Europe, and now banks being able to custody Bitcoin, there's just this constant competitive pressure. And so
a large miner would, it's like wherever there's centralization or concentration, it presents a relative degree of risk. But just as the network gets larger, the share that's controlled by, on average, any one entity becomes smaller. The share that's controlled of power that's hashing Bitcoin, on average, it represents a smaller and smaller share, even accepting that there are still large holders and large mines that mine Bitcoin.
And if anyone has a question in the audience right here, I'll alternate back and forth from the chat but if in person, if you want to ask a question, just raise your hand. Thomas?
Yeah, so my one question for you, Parker, would pertain to the enforcement mechanism inherent in integrating Bitcoin into the financial system. So effectively right now, you have the dollar and the sovereign, right, in the US, and you go and borrow money from the bank and you default. And the sheriff comes and kicks you out of your house. How do you integrate the enforcement mechanism for fraud or default with that Bitcoin interface?
It's a good question. If you think about it, and I always like to go back to the fundamental that fixed supply is the foundation. Everyone's opting into a form of money that can't be printed, but then you actually have to build that money into every part of the financial system. So as an example, right now we're working on Bitcoin payments. We're building invoices to allow people that bill by invoices to be paid in Bitcoin, working on a point of sale. The question you ask around like title, that somebody could lend money to you in Bitcoin to go buy a house, and then you could file a deed. The county clerk says, this money is owed to me and it's denominated in Bitcoin, and nothing needs to change about that system. Two parties need to be willing to enter into that contract, and there needs to be a settlement engine that happens. But if you don't pay the money back, then the person can go to the court and say, hey, the person hasn't met their financial obligations. I have all of these rights per my contract. So none of that changes. But we still do need to build Bitcoin into, like, if you want to settle oil for Bitcoin, that's a different type of transaction. If you want to settle real estate in Bitcoin, it's a different type of transaction at point of sale, e-commerce. All of that is being built on this foundation that what is the fundamental demand of Bitcoin, the money that can't be printed. And all of that, I'd say, is just a function of time and people adopting Bitcoin. But there's nothing about Bitcoin. Like, you could even build a credit system in Bitcoin where the money first goes to a processor and the processor could kick it back if it's fraud. Nothing about Bitcoin is inconsistent there's nothing inconsistent with Bitcoin and every financial transaction that happens. But in order to make Bitcoin that transactional currency day to day, humans actually have to build it. And that just takes time and capital.
So the answer to your question is it cannot. And the reason is because Bitcoin doesn't have smart contracts built. So the only thing you can do to Bitcoin is just move Bitcoin from one person to another. If you adopt my view of crypto, of having an operating system with asset, you can tokenize your title. And so talk about enforcement mechanism. If your title is on chain and you borrow against your house and then you default, automatically you can have a smart contract that is enforces the fact that they can take your house. And so, yes, if you have a better blockchain system with smart contract, you can do what you're asking.
Yeah, and it's just because that concept came up, what I would say is it's like blockchain can only enforce the smart contracts native to it. It can't dictate to Travis County what the law is and what the procedures are to evict somebody out of their house, or a bankruptcy court to enforce a contract. Money is still one half of every other transaction. And while you can't program money on Bitcoin's blockchain, it's like if I pay you money and you give me your house, and I say write a note that says there's seller financing, you go spend that money to somebody else, and if you don't repay it to me, you don't have the money. I don't have some way to just grab the money that you no longer have. And so it's like, if you think about it, of money being one half of every value transfer, that no blockchain can enforce things in the real world. They can't move you out of the house. If I have your a car and there's a loan against it, and the bank has it, somebody still has to come take the car away from me, repossess it. I still have rights at a court, and none of that changes because somebody put a contract on a blockchain, and none of it changes the fact that the money sits at the foundation of that. So if you have bad money, then you're going to have a unstable and fragile economic system that sits on top.
It's easier to collateralize when it's on chain. That one of the problems is that sometimes you take the same collateral, the same asset, and you collateralize in multiple loans. You know, that's actually fraudulent. But then if the title is on chain, you cannot go and use your house to get 3 different mortgages. Because if you do one, you cannot do it the second or third one.
Anyone else in the audience? I'll go to the chat. Money debasement forces people to chase yield just to outpace inflation. At 2%, you lose half your purchasing power in 36 years. Shouldn't normal people be able to just save cash?
I want to answer this question because Parker talked about how people don't save, don't have the savings enough. So inflation, it's not just on the price of eggs. Inflation is also on your wage. So if you actually look at the real wages of people, they actually went up over the last 50 years. It's not that everything goes up in prices, but your wage doesn't go up. Like when you have inflation affects all the prices, the price of your house, the price of wages that you get. So the basement is not because, how eggs are expensive, my salary is the same. Also, your salary increases with inflation. What doesn't increase with inflation is the cash. It's true. The only thing that they get debased is the cash component. But honestly, if you want to save, you don't just put your money under the mattress. You save in assets, like just simply buying treasury. Treasury gives you back the money, the inflation, or buy stocks, or buy anything else. So the only thing that actually inflation takes the money away from is just pure cash. Right? Any other savings, your wages and so on, are not really affected by inflation. What hurts us is uncertainty about inflation. That's true. I make a plan to actually buy offer a bond and so on. If I don't know what the inflation is next year, then that might actually create uncertainty. But inflation itself doesn't really destroy value. The only thing it does is incentivize people not to hold cash and actually, invest it in the real economy.
Can you repeat the question so I get my answer?
Yes. So shouldn't people be able to save at 2% inflation? They lose half their purchasing power in 36 years. Is that a problem?
Yeah, so I would say people should be able to save without having 50% of their purchasing power being gone over 30 years. And that nominal wages increase as inflation occurs, but the actual real purchasing power of wages has not increased. Functionally, real wages for the average worker have not increased since the gold standard was left in 1970. There's a great site called WTF happened in 1971, and it shows all the statistics. But the real stats are nominal. The median nominal wages in the United States have increased by about 70%, and houses have increased by 180%. So that is your wages not keeping up with inflation. Food has gone up by 250%. That's food not keeping up with inflation. And what all that means is the reason why people don't have savings, don't have the $400, is because they can't save. That their cost of living is going up faster than their wages are. That's the actual reality of the economic system as it exists today. And so, it's like if you go to the micro example of just yourself, what would you do? What system would you opt into? You'd opt into the system that incentivizes saving that people can't print, and that if you want to invest in something and take risk, you do that because you want something to exist in the world and you're taking discernible risk. You're not having to get rid of your money for the reason that you know that your money is losing value. That's what Bitcoin is solving. And what I think happens is that it results in a definancialization where people do have more savings, and there'd be plenty of risk taken because people still have problems that need solving outside of just their money. It's just right now our biggest problem is the money.
I just encourage you, just, you have your AI, ChatGPT, ask them the real wages over the last 50 years. Ask them, did the real wages, the median real wages, did they go up or not? And you'll see that they are. I don't know by how much, to be honest with you, but over the last 50 years, I can guarantee you that the median real wages went up.
Michael?
Oh, well, so in economics, there's a thing called the Cantillon effect, where money is a non-neutral good, meaning when they print additional dollars, it doesn't just go to everyone. It goes to specific places first, and then the rest of the economy has to catch up as prices adjust to that fact of money having been injected into a particular place. Basically, who is friends with the money printer and the people who are least friendly with the money printer are the less politically connected. They're the ones who have to bear the cost of that. And when you talk about even real wages coming up, not only do we have to deal with the fact that that money is effectively being redistributed from the holders of that money to the money printers and who they decide to inject that new cash to, but you're also looking at the unseen effects of what would the economy have looked like had they not printed money at all. So to simply look at real wages going up does not also ask the question of how much more could real wages have gone up if they didn't print the money at all, and people could have just saved their money, and the economy could have operated off real savings rather than debt financing.
First of all, the way that just for everybody, the way that you put money into the economy is not that you just go on a helicopter and you just hand out the money to the first person you meet. So what the Fed does is they buy treasuries for the most part. For the most part, they go out and they buy treasury. That's how they inject money into the system, by buying treasury. Right? And then who gets the money? Well, the people that sold the treasury to the Fed. And then that money spreads around. But it's not that, I'm politically connected, I'm going to get the money from the Fed. They just buy from the open market, from the Fed. The second part is about counterfactual, essentially. What would have happened if we had a fixed monetary supply? This is a great question. I don't have an answer. I can tell you that when COVID happened, we would have been a lot worse if we had a fixed monetary supply.
And what I would say is go to WTF happened in 1971. The real wages, which again, real wages are purchasing power. Like nominal wages, yes, have increased, but the real wages of median wage in the United States, real wages, has been flat and not increased, declined in the face of inflation. And that's Bureau of Labor Statistics. So yes, nominal wages have increased. Some people, particularly at the very wealthy end of the spectrum, have done phenomenal because the printing of money hurts the people at the lower end of the economic spectrum the most because they don't have assets to offset it. 100% of their savings gets debased because they only have cash. That's what happens when people print money. But it's really, you have to think about it from your individual level, what you would want and whether that extends out to every next person.
Go to the chat. No one has questions here. What regulations do you think will be put in place to solve a tragedy of the commons problem regarding Bitcoin? Couldn't Bitcoin draw a stronger class divide? Not really.
Yeah. So what I would say to that is You know, one of the beautiful things about Bitcoin is it has this fixed supply and anyone can opt into it. It actually levels the playing field. It's egalitarian. It matters who you are in the US financial system. But the poorest person in Nicaragua could choose to save in the fixed supply and have the benefit of that, as does a billionaire in New York. But in the Bitcoin network, equal rights are actually enforced. Nobody can print your money, and only you can decide when to spend it and how, and the value of it can't be debased. And so what I would say is there is no tragedy of commons. The way that Bitcoin solves the tragedy of commons problem is that there is also scarcity in the amount of data, and that we have to innovate on top of that limit such that everyone is not having to store every small transaction for every person on the world. That's more like how Ethereum works. That's one of the reasons why Ethereum is massively centralized. It's what ensures that everyone can run the Bitcoin blockchain on a basic computer, and one of the reasons why Bitcoin is so like orders of magnitude more decentralized.
I'm not sure what Bitcoin has to do with the tragedy of the commons. The tragedy of the commons, just for everybody, is the idea that there is no incentive to invest in common goods because you always expect the other people to invest in common goods, and so no one invests in common goods. So it's not clear to me what the relationship with Bitcoin is. What's the second question?
I think reading it again, it's more like, is there going to be?
For the value transfer. So I think if it does happen that everybody's going to use Bitcoin, there is going to be a huge value transfer from late adopters to early adopters. Huge, uncontroversial. That if everybody's going to start using Bitcoin, the people that bought Bitcoin early are going to be much better off than the people that bought Bitcoin there, for sure. So the question is, do we want to live in a society that has a huge traumatic value transfer from people, probably poorer people, because at the end, like who actually owns Bitcoin right now? They're not the poor people that own Bitcoin. They're probably the wealthier people. Do we want to actually have a system where there's going to be a huge wealth transfer from poor people to rich people?
Yeah, and one other thing I'll clarify on the tragedy of the commons, that one other way to think about it is like whaling, that no one owns the ocean, and people were killing whales to get oil to light candles. No one actually had ownership over, so there was fear that the whales were going to go extinct, and that's a tragedy of the commons. And Bitcoin, oftentimes people will view there being a potential for a tragedy of the commons because the way that the system works, the way that everyone's able to rely on this fixed supply is that all transactions are stored on everyone's computer. And if it were possible to spam the network such that everyone had to store literally every last transaction of every person on earth, if there wasn't an economic incentive to basically ensure that you can't force costs on me to have to run a massive computer that only a large institution could run, there would be the potential for a tragedy of the commons if you could externalize the cost of your transactions onto me, but Bitcoin has a solution to that as well.
Yeah, Professor Fracassi, I believe you said, or your argument is that we need the central bank or some Federal Reserve as a backfill for times of crisis and to provide liquidity to the market when or if there is a crisis that comes.
Not just a crisis. I think a 2% inflation is actually good for society. And I think that's pretty much the consensus across economists.
Sure. My question's actually for Parker of what is your response to that in terms of government's role in providing or helping through crises, and how does Bitcoin or a government operating on a Bitcoin standard facilitate that?
Yeah, and so I will accept or agree that 99% of economists would say that it's important to have the ability to print money. I would also say that the reality of the economic instability that we see is a function of that. And that what I said before is there's nothing about Bitcoin that prevents you from having a central bank. You just actually have to give it money. Like when the central bank was created, it didn't have this ability to create money out of thin air. It just didn't. Or at least the first bank of the United States didn't. Really severing the connection between the dollar and gold is what gave this digital world where you could just print trillions of dollars that didn't exist. So what I view is that governments are going to have some, not even like a strategic reserve, they're going to have some rainy day fund. So you can capitalize a government with a rainy day fund and then allow the government to be able to allocate money in times of crisis. All we're talking about is that they're no longer going to have the ability to just make money up out of thin air, that they can tax us and then save it and then say, hey, we need to be able to have some central entity to spend money to fund things like FEMA. Nothing about Bitcoin is inconsistent with that. It's just the mechanism by which how money is created. That if you can print it out of thin air, it really strips us of our ability to participate in the governance of how it's funded. To say, yeah, just be honest, just tax me, do it above board, tax me for the money and put it in the rainy day fund. And then when you need it, show us how you're spending it. And if you lose it, then you're gonna have to tax some more. And then we get to continue to decide whether the people that are running the show are actually doing a good job running the show. It doesn't eliminate the ability of governments to run similar functions. It just makes it more honest.
All right, I've got time for one last question. Do the chat here. What is stopping somebody from making a Bitcoin copycat, decentralized, finite? And could this be a threat to Bitcoin in the future?
I think we already have it. It's called Bitcoin Cash. The code is 99% the same as Bitcoin. Again, there's nothing magical about the Bitcoin code. The reason why Bitcoin is the most adopted one is because it came first. And so there's this social consensus or coordination. Like, 1 megabyte versus 12 megabyte of storage. It's not gonna make the crypto that much different. It's just a matter of coordination. Like it's like VHS. I know you're probably too old. VHS versus Betamax is like, how do we coordinate on a standard? Whether it's Bitcoin Cash or Bitcoin, I mean, at the end, we just need to coordinate on a single asset and agree that that single asset is the one that counts. But we already have them. I think that it will be very hard to coordinate to say, okay, now let's all switch from Bitcoin to Bitcoin Cash because of coordination failures.
Yeah, and I would say like Bitcoin's functionally been copied 50,000 times, and you can copy Bitcoin's code base, but you can't copy the Bitcoin network. You can't copy all the people that have adopted Bitcoin as money. You can't copy all of the custody infrastructure. You can't copy all of the energy infrastructure that's securing it. You can't copy all of the wallets that make it easy to send Bitcoin around the world. So you can't copy the monetary properties. You can't copy its fixed supply because everyone, at the end of the day, only needs one form of money, and money converges to one. The most important property of money is that somebody else can't print it.
All right, well, thank you guys for coming out. And I want to thank Parker and Professor Fracassi. So if you don't mind, we can do the exit debate. I think we may need some proof of work in here or something. We had 652 votes in the opening poll.
How many people are on the
Someone figured out the system, but
somebody hacked it?
Yeah. So this was the opening poll.
That somebody hacked it for sure.
652.
Okay.
How many people were in the Zoom?
Oh God, 15. I think I saw next.
Are people online doing this?
I think we just keep pressing, open up new windows. Okay. Really lead for crypto. I think I'll call it after in 15 seconds if you can get your vote in. All right. Well, it looks like Professor Fracassi got the win tonight. More people shifted to.
How does that work?
I mean, we had a overwhelming majority in Bitcoin here.
How many people voted in the second one?
That's the thing, it's
How many people voted?
75 somehow, so I don't know.
People change their minds.
650 people voted in the.
I think it's unfair for him because if everybody's pro Bitcoin, he cannot win. I mean, like how much more than 100% can you get? You know?
Regardless, I enjoyed it.
Yeah.